All right, I'm back, and this is the third part of development. So we've talked about physical and cognitive development, and so this is the side about social development or social emotional development across our lifespan, and it's actually kind of important and pretty cool topic because the social attachment that occurs in our very young infancy has a major impact on our adulthood. So it's one of those things where you can see a moment in our life that explains maybe our behaviors in our adulthood. So something that psychologists are super excited about when they sort of explore these arenas of our development. All right, so first we have to understand like what the social environment is, and there's like these ecological systems theories, these different environmental systems that we're involved in. So the child is there centered in the red, and the microsystem is the immediate environment. Mesosystem is the connections between their environments. Exosystem, the indirect environments, the macro system, the social and cultural environments, and then the chronosystem, like the changes over time. And so, just to show you, this is going to be like the immediate settings, like family and school, to super broad topics like the era, our period of time that we're in. Just so you have an example, the microsystem is like our family, the friends that we have, school, neighborhood. It's that immediate environment completely surrounding us, right? That impacts us or influences us. Then the mesosystem is going to be connections and relationships between our microsystems. So how our parents interact with the teacher, how our parents interact with each other, how our brothers and sisters interact, how our neighborhood interacts, right? How our school interacts with each other. So those sort of connections between those people in our environment are a mesosystem. The exosystem are the environments that affect the individual that are indirect, such as your parents' workplace. So if your parents' workplace is terrible and your parents hate their job, then that might impact your environment at home, right? Or the school board's not doing their job and therefore the school system is terrible, that can impact your education. Or the local government doesn't create a safe environment in your neighborhood and therefore you have an impact on your environment. Or, of course, the opposites, where things are doing great, right, have an impact on your environment as well. So the exosystem is these indirect environments that are that will come back and impact you. And then mesosystems are the connections between, I mean, excuse me, the macro system is the next one, and that is the overachieving cultural context, values, and laws and economic systems. So our taboos and our social norms, our like morality, our laws that our society has, the economy that we're in. So like whether it's capitalism or communism, these things are environments that are way out there, right? But they have overarching sort of cultural context to us. And then finally, the chronosystem. This is the dimension of time. So historical events like COVID, right, will be an impact of a chronosystem environment on a child, right? These sort of periods or historical events or social historical sort of context that the era involves. So that's kind of environment in a nutshell. Like, what are the environments that are impacting us and are part of our social? The big one in our immediate environment is parenting. And there are three parenting styles we have to know: authoritarian, authoritative, and permissive. Authoritarian are like the strictest, sort of meanest parents in context. They have real high expectations of their children, and they give not much emotional support. Kind of a cold parenting style where strictness, where the parent tells you what to do, and you are not allowed to really have much communication back to the parent. While you do have high achieving children in the authoritarian parenting style, there's obviously issues with the low emotional support and when it comes to social development and whether the independence of the child ever is developed because they're not allowed to sort of explore and think on their own. They are given orders and they follow it out. On the other end is permissive. These parents have zero expectations of their kids, but they're very emotionally supportive, like the friend of their child. The problem is, without any rules or enforcements, the children are basically become adults on their own. And then, of course, they're not maybe sort of high achieving adults if they don't have any expectations or drive to sort of get them. They're more like surviving adults, right? And they have friendships with their parents, which is great, but then friendships have issues as well. And without that sort of that border that defines, parent and child, then there can be some issues with sort of being able to have that child develop and grow. The one in the middle, right? Goldilocks' porridge is authoritative. These parents have high expectations, but they also have high emotional support. So in this case, your parents are definitely explaining why, right? Why things are happening, why the rules are in place. They'll talk to you about why you feel about this, how you feel about it. They'll even listen to your objections to their rules. And every once in a while, like 25% of the time, they may even change their decision based on your feedback. So there is this communication between. So authoritarian, high communication from the parents, low communication coming from the children. And permissive, a lot of communication coming from the children. They're telling the parents how to be, right? Low communication from the parents to the child. Authoritative, there's a lot of communication going back and forth. And so those things are super important when you're thinking about a parenting style and what would be most beneficial. There are cultural differences, though. I mean, they wrote a book called Tiger Mom, which talked about an East Asian culture of very strict mothers with high expectations and low emotional support. Things in which they were not apologetic about it because they were looking at the accomplishments of their children in all these fields and weren't upset about the emotional anger or damage that had been done by them forcing their children to do all these things. One of the cultural differences we talk about is like independence versus interdependence. In the U.S., we're promoting you to become individualistic, to get out there and support yourself and go out on your own. Where in collectivist cultures, it's all about the family depends on you, and we want you to be connected to your family, community, and have social responsibility so that you belong to somebody and that you are responsible for other people. Also, the idea versus discipline and control, where strict authoritative approaches to expect obedience might be in a collectivist culture, where Western parents may use like negotiation talk, right? Expression of warmth. Western parents might show more affection, where in the East there might not be warmth as in like hugging and affection and talk, but as in like support and care. And so those things are some of the cultural differences in the parenting. All right, let's talk about the big things in development. Let's talk about the chronological sort of social development. And when we start with development, and we talked about critical periods with imprinting and Konrad Lorenz with physical development of animals, but attachment is a social, emotional thing, and it has a critical period as well. So what is attachment? It's an emotional bond. It's a closeness that a child has with his caregiver. It's the trust, right? That if they are needing something, that person will be there for them. And the only way that a child and an infant in this very critical period, right, is able to sort of ask for help with their parents is them crying. And the response of that parent, how quickly they respond, how they respond in kindness, right? That is what is involved in this attachment. So there are like three elements that sort of create a strong attachment. You being there, familiarity, right? This touch, this comfort, this hug, right? This sort of physical bond. And at the beginning of the child's life, right after birth, they do a thing called skin to skin, where the parent and the child start to bond immediately. Right? And this idea of responsiveness, how well the parent responds to the child's needs. And in this case, i.e., how long does a child have to cry before a parent gives it some emotional and kind response, right? Does it sit there and get neglected, or does it have a very responsive environment? And those things are all the elements that are important to attachment. And what we've discovered is that the critical period is immediate, and so it doesn't have to be a biological parent. It doesn't even have to be a mother. We used to think it had to be a mom, but it doesn't, because all it has to be is a guardian that can provide those three things: familiarity, being around, right? Touch, that connection, right? That physical bond. And then responsiveness, responding to the child when it cries. Now, if this occurs correctly, then the child trusts the world around it. It trusts the people, and it will explore its environment. This has major long-term impacts on what they will be like as an adult. But if this attachment doesn't come correct, right? If it doesn't develop and secure, then it could cause social issues throughout the child's entire life, which is kind of showing the importance of a critical period, right? That this attachment has to be created in infancy so that they have an empathy towards the world, and because they understand the world has empathy towards them. There's obviously cultural influence on this. You know, there may be more attachment in warm environments and cultures, and then, you know, less attachment, emotional bond, in more cold, sort of, you know, strict parent environments. But we do also know that there's a genetic influence, because temperament is our emotional disposition at birth. And so that sort of influences how we view our child. And our cultures might think that someone that's crying all the time is difficult, while other cultures might think that some baby that's crying all the time is just wanting more connection and feeling close. And so how they sort of view that has a cultural influence, which then can impact the attachment. All right. So Mary Ainsworth came up with this method, this trial to sort of test the attachment styles of infants. It turns out that we can figure out and discover whether infants have attachment very early. And the daycare scenario is what happens. The idea is, if we're trying to test the child's attachment, we're going to have them be dropped off at a daycare, and the mom is going to leave, and we're going to observe the behavior of the baby after the mom leaves. And then, after an extended period of time, such as leaving a child in daycare, the mom is going to return, and we're going to observe the child's reaction when the mom returns. And this really helped Mary Ainsworth sort of understand the different attachment styles socially that can occur, and then we also know about some of the long-term impacts. So the one attachment style that you want, and which 80% of the people in the United States or in the world usually are able to achieve, is a secure attachment style. Secure attachment style means that you have created a bond with your parent that you trust, and that you have a belief that they will be there for you. And therefore, you have empathy towards others because you are feeling the empathy of your mother, and you trust in that empathy. And so what does that mean? When the mom leaves the daycare, you are going to have a baby that's crying and upset, but will be able to be soothed and enjoy its time at daycare after a short period of time. But when mom returns, the baby is going to be extremely happy. So being upset when mom leaves and happy when mom returned, and being able to be settled down in between, is the sign of a securely attached, healthy social baby. On the other side is the insecure attachment. These are the ones in which we're a little worried about the social development and that there could be long-term issues. You know, one of your worst one is insecure attachment style of avoidant. When the mom leaves, the baby doesn't care, and when the mom returns, the baby doesn't care. Very cold, very unconnected, unattached social behavior. No empathy because it doesn't feel empathy. No trust because it doesn't receive any reason to believe in trust. This could be because if a parent is neglectful, right, or abusive. So there is no social connection, and the baby just doesn't care. And that is visible in a daycare. You could see that. How about like insecure anxious? The baby is upset when mom leaves, but also is upset when mom returns, almost like they didn't think mom would come back. Right? And so that is something that shows them that there's some sort of parenting where it's not consistent. Maybe the parent has a job that takes them out of the house for a really long time, and they can't give that consistent response system, but when they're there, they're very responsive. Or maybe there's a habit that's not good that the parent is engaging in, which causes them to be out of it at certain periods of time, and therefore, sometimes they're responsive and sometimes they're not. So this can cause the child to be like, have no trust. They want the attachment because there is good moments, but there's no trust in the consistency. And then insecure disorganized means the same thing. There's just an inconsistency here, and in this style, their response system is inconsistent. They can be happy, they can be upset, either or in either situation, which just means that there is some sort of confusion and not a secure attachment that is necessary for social development. All right, one of the things that shows obviously a healthy social attachment is separation anxiety. This is the being upset when the mom leaves. This is the normal apprehension that a young child feels when the person or people whom they're attached to is gone. All right, and so we went back and we started to look at attachment. I've already told you some of the reasons why, right? But this is the big research. This was Harry Harlow, and he had rhesus monkeys, and he separated them from their birth mothers, and he gave them fake moms. He gave them a cloth mother, which just had terry cloth, very physical comfort, and then they gave them a wire mom, just straight hard metal wire, but it did have the food that was needed for nutrition. And they discovered that physical comfort, right, and sort of contact was more important than nutrition when it came to the attachment being created. The rhesus monkeys would spend almost 20 hours a day on their cloth mom and would only go to the wire mom when they needed food. More importantly, when they got put into social environments and they had their mom there with them, their fake mom, if they went into like a playground environment, which a child should socially discover and like go explore if they're safely attached, the the monkeys that had the wire mom would not go explore the environment. Matter of fact, they were frozen in fear. While the monkeys that had the terry cloth mom, they would go explore the environment, get scared, come back, reach the comfort of their mom, and then go back and explore their environment again. And this just showed that a healthy social baby is one that has attachment and physical contact, responsiveness, and familiarity are more important than just giving food. All right. So some of the important aspects of childhood is in social development is like our pretend play. That interaction with our peers helps us learn the different roles, right? Teacher, student, doctor, patient, friend, mom, child. Those things are all learned in the social development learned through pretend play. And then parallel play also is a way in which we are socially learning. It's like we play next to each other, but not with each other. So we're realizing that it's important to be around, even if we haven't gotten to the point where we're able to share or be able to be engaged with each other. Being around each other seems to be a draw for children in the parallel play. Anybody see the wardrobe change? Anyway, this PowerPoint went so long that I had to take 2 days to do it. So we left off at adolescence. We were talking about social relationships. We talked about the childhood peer relationships and like how those are important for pretend play and parallel play. But the adolescence period of our time for social emotional development, our peer relationships become even more crucial. So you see this switch from like totally depending on our parents for our social interactions and for the information that we get about the world and how we understand and what we like about the world to moving into more peer influence, where we look for friends for emotional support all of a sudden, like about things that we might not want to talk about with our parents. And they might influence our behavior because we might conform to do what they do, right? They might help shape our self-esteem. The fact that we have them makes us feel good about ourselves, but if we don't feel good in our friend group, we can feel bad. And it also helps us facilitate the needed social skills. We learn empathy for our friends. We have arguments, and those things get resolved, and that teaches us how to do that in our adulthood. One of the biggest things that I ever tell kids who go through relationships, like significant others in high school, and they have a breakup, and it feels like the end of the world, and that's a real feeling. But the idea is that every high school relationship is a successful relationship, because in the end, it teaches you how to be in a real adult relationship in the future. So even though these high school relationships feel like the end of the world and, it's like a tragic ending when they break up, there's still like this idea that it was a good thing because it teaches you how to be in a relationship in the future. And that goes for friendships and romantic relationships as well. The egocentrism of teenage life is a little bit different. One aspect is the imaginary audience, the idea that everything we do is under a spotlight and everyone around us is constantly watching us. If we have a pimple in our face, everyone notices it and everyone is staring at us. If we make a mistake, everyone sees it and everyone's talking about it. And honestly, that's not true because everyone else around us is teenage life is also experiencing this same imaginary audience. So they are so focused on self and how self looks and how people are perceiving self that they're not thinking about others. And there's also this personal fable, like this idea that everything we do is unique and not formed or shaped by our environment. not like influence, that we came up with it on our own. I love how my daughter, who's the oldest, likes to look down on my youngest for copying her when my daughter just copied somebody else when it came to style. And there's also this idea that we can't be defeated, that we're invulnerable, and that can lead to risky decisions as well. Okay, so in adulthood, our relationships are kind of moving away from this romance and fairy tales to more like open communication and trust and support, taking each other to doctor appointments, reminding each other of the doctor appointments, helping each other, and companionship. Having mutual friendships and groups together, navigating the chores of life and sharing their responsibilities. These are all what like adult social relationships are. But don't get me wrong, in elderly life, when people go to like places, living communities for the elderly, where they have these social groups, you have some of these same high school, teenage social things pop up again. But in normal sort of adulthood social life, it's more like looking for the shared responsibility and sort of this friendship bond that sort of navigates life together. One thing that we have to talk about in social development is the culture of social development, and cultures influence us heavily in sort of what we do in our life, in our social events in our life. Getting married, graduating college, getting a job, moving out of the home, retiring from our job. They all have cultural social clocks, like these cultural expectations of what time in our life that we should achieve those sort of social milestones. And so sometimes our social clock is ticking, especially when our social clock is tied to a biological clock. Getting married is the first step to having children in most societies, and you you know that like there is a biological clock on women when for having children. So, once they get married, people start to expect that, okay, once you're married, you should be having children pretty soon afterwards in cultures. And so that would be something like a social clock that's also tied to a biological clock. um, Emerging adulthood is like this other sort of weird cultural thing. Like, not all cultures have kids who go into adulthood after the age of 18. And especially in Western cultures, we're seeing this sort of new era of people who can live at home from 18 to 25 and sort of navigate the life of college and the early workforce before they start moving out of the house and having a family of their own. So sometimes this period between the end of our teenage adolescence and before we move out of the house in Western culture and have a family, and we're still in an emerging adulthood period. And so that's kind of what the explanation is like. It's a cultural thing, and usually Western sort of have this idea that maybe emerging adulthood means we're not quite ready for the all adult experience. Okay, so just like Piaget was huge in sort of understanding cognitive development, and he created these stages of cognitive development. In social psychology, our big psychologist is Erik Erikson. Now, Konrad Lorenz is important for imprinting, and of course, Harry Harlow tells us what's important for attachment. But when it comes to the stages of our psychosocial development and our development of our identity, our sense of who we are, Erikson came up with these stages of development that we go through. And these stages are basically these tasks that we have to accomplish. And if we accomplish it, then we move on healthy socially. And if we don't, then our social development is somehow stunted or not progressing the way it should. And so it starts off in our infant age. And the idea of our social development is trust versus mistrust, right? Basic trust versus mistrust. The baby cries. Does a mom respond? If a baby cries and it can trust that the mom or dad, can respond, or guardian responds to it, then that baby is going to develop a sense of trust with others, social trust. If the mother, father, or guardian doesn't respond, then the baby might have a sense of no trust. And we talked about that with attachment, right? And we talked about the long-term implications of attachment. If humans don't develop attachment, they don't feel empathy, they don't have empathy, and they can have very bad personality disorders in their adulthood, right? Including antisocial personality disorder. The second stage, if it's, if everything is resolved correctly and trust is developed, which most kids do, they move on to the autonomy stage. And this is, as a toddler, the shame versus doubt. They want the self-control and willpower to do things on their own, dress themselves even though they don't do it correctly, go to the bathroom even though they might not do it completely correctly. They want that ability to try things for themselves. And if a parent allows them to do that and doesn't shame them for that, doesn't punish them for that when they make mistakes, but rather shows them how to do it, then they will once again pass through the social development stage of feeling the ability, right, to be on one's own in a social situation. If that happens, they move on to their preschooler age, and that is the initiative stage, right? And this is where they're trying to initiate plans, right? And if they can initiate plans and like create a plan and carry it out, then they feel that they have a direction and purpose. But if they're shamed for it, then they might feel guilt. So if someone is trying to do a lemonade stand, and you help them they plan it and they control it and do it, and you kind of guide them and make them feel good about it, even though when they have a mistake, then you develop a good social confidence in the child to be able to initiate and carry out plans on their own. If you shame them again or make them feel bad, just like in the toddler stage, then they're not going to feel confident to initiate and carry out plans. So this social development has a lot to do with some sort of cognitive development too. And you'll see a lot of social cognitive psychology where the environment really enhances the understanding of the world. And in this case, our social interactions are really sort of helping us create the power to think for ourselves and have cognition, right? Have an identity, which is what we're getting to. The next stage is at the school age, like the not preschool age, excuse me, the elementary school age, and this is where you want to seem like you are comparable to your peers. You want to feel not inferior, and so you're trying to feel like you're productive and not inferior. And this is where you compare yourself to your peers in the classroom. Did you get an A in math? Did they get an A in math? If so, you feel right good about yourself, and it encourages you socially to keep being confident and try. If you compare yourself in the classroom or in the ball field or anywhere else in the art room, and you don't feel like your stuff is as good as your peers, then you feel inferior, and that can make you not want to try, to withdraw effort in the presence of others because you don't feel capable or similar to them. So all you need is a couple of wins, and it really does boost your confidence, right, socially, and allows you to explore and be challenged in front of others cognitively and not back away from that challenge. All right, the big one. So basic trust in infant age is the big one that people always talk about because it's connected to attachment, and we've already learned about how important attachment is and what that can mean for long-term social relationships in your adulthood. The other really big stage of Erikson's that they focus on is our adolescent teenage stage, which is great because that's where you are. And it's the idea of identity versus role confusion, right? In our adolescent age, we are trying out all these different roles. I started off in high school wearing cowboy boots and a large belt buckle. The electronic rave music came in, and I dabbled in those big baggy jeans that like swept the floor, and yet I made the high school baseball team very early, and then I started becoming like a baseball player, sports guy for the rest of my high school life. That's who my identity was. But those little three stages were me going through role confusion. Like if I had hair, right, I could dye it, or I could try a piercing, or I could get a back tattoo. Who knows, right? All of those things might be things of me trying out new identities. But eventually, somewhere in this stage, Erikson says that we find out who we are. And when I'm looking here at the high school, yeah, there's some ninth graders who absolutely know who they are. But a lot of ninth graders really trying to figure out who they are within the Beckham community. But by 10th grade, and for sure by junior year, they have solidified who they are at the school, and you can tell that they go from like this meek, like not confident sort of public appearance while they're trying to figure it out, to a very confident public appearance about self because they knew who they are. So if you kind of land on the identity you are, the group of people you're around, then you kind of have this identity, this self concept, and you're successfully moving forward. All right. So in our young age, our young adult age, Erickson focuses on relationships, right? Especially those that are significant others, intimacy versus isolation. You know, do we want to share our life with others, right? And that means compromise. Have to bring the toilet seat back down after you go to the bathroom, or you have to have smelly, scents that smell like roses or flowers in your apartment. Do you want to share those things, right? And have intimacy and be vulnerable and share the secrets that you have with others, with another? Or do you want to live a life of isolation? You're not ready to share that life, and you want to be someone who is not, connected. And so obviously Erickson leans toward, if you connect, you move through successfully, and if you are isolated and not, then it's not successful. In the middle age, it's generativity versus stagnation, midlife crisis. Have I lived, have I done everything I want to do? Am I productive? Do I care about my life? Is my life interesting, right? And do I need to bring some more light, some more energy to my life, right? Or is my life sort of just stuck in a same process? And you'll see a lot of change happen in middle age, where people explore and do things that they've always wanted to do, or things that they haven't done before, because they're trying to stay productive and not stagnant. And then finally, in our elder years, did I live a good life versus a life of despair? Like reflecting back on life, and did I get my bucket list checked off, or do I feel like my life wasn't lived out the right way? And so those are the entire processes and stages of Erik Erikson's in our psychosocial development. When we talk about social environments, we also have to, mention the importance, especially in psychology, about adverse childhood experiences. The idea that there are traumatic events that can happen before a child reaches the 18 that can shape them for the rest of their life. And we know, like abuse, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual, we know in psychology that while our heart breaks for the victims of those, we also know that they are more likely than the average human to be abusers themselves because of the environment they're raised in, or that they're going to have some psychological issues connected to the experiences that they had. Neglect, the same way. You can be physically neglected, no touch, coldness, emotionally neglect, and those things can be detrimental to a child's sort of social development for the rest of their life. There's also dysfunction in the household. Watching a mom get abused, watching substance abuse, a person with a mental illness in the household, or a relative who's incarcerated. Those things are adverse childhood experiences that can absolutely shape our entire adulthood. All right, when we talk about that stage of Erikson, adolescence and identity development, there are just four sort of parts of identity development. Identity foreclosure, they have made a commitment to identity, and they haven't even ever explored the other options. They were solid from the get-go, and there are people out there in the world who are who they are from the get-go. There's identity diffusion, those people who really haven't tried to explore new identities, nor even made a commitment to who they are. You really don't know what's going on with their identity. There's identity achievement, those who after exploration have made a commitment, and that's what I think I did in my life when I went through the cowboy belt to the rave to the baseball sort of job. Those are sort of that. And but then there's also identity moratorium, those who have trying to find an identity but haven't made that commitment yet, and so they're going through the process, right? Okay, finally, this was a long one, but I told you this had all the good stuff. When we talk about the identity development of us in our teenage years, the factors that are involved, like our race, ethnicity, our gender identity, our sexual orientation, our religion, our job, our family around us. But also there's this possible self, this idea of what we could become that also is a very impactful in how we develop who we are, right? That's it. If I say goodbye quickly, I can make it under 35 minutes. Unbelievable. See you next time.